Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I've known Ricki and Annie for a long time. I didn't realize I'd known you since your first film together, although, Ricki, you had done a film prior to that. If I'm not going to talk very much, because really this is their story, and they're amazing filmmakers, and they have built a successful company over the years that I've known them. And I just went on their website yesterday to just take a look at what they've been doing lately, and I have to say I was quite astounded by the breadth of your work, the length and breadth, and variety, and how you've expanded not only your work, but your clientele. So if you could just begin by explaining how you guys met and how you worked together on your first film and what that started for you in terms of a relationship.
Well, I'll just say that I had started Breakthrough Films as a company right out of a little bit of grad school, but mostly I went to grad school for a year and I left because I knew I wanted to make documentary films, and I was in theater school, and basically started the company so that I could raise money, nonprofit money, for a film about youth in a youth program in Harlem called the Manhattan Valley Youth Program. Anyway, but I didn't really think of it as a company at the time. I mean, it really was just a checkbook that I could deposit nonprofit money into, the kind of situation. And then Annie and I had worked at HBO. I was at HBO. Then we worked on a feature together. We went to college together, but we didn't really know each other in college, and Annie is a couple years younger.
I just have to say, I really did meet Ricki. We were freezing our asses off in Vermont, working for no money. I had just graduated from college, and it was a production that was shooting up in Vermont, and they recruited Dartmouth students because we were relatively well-educated, cheap, hungry labor, and we were nearby. And so we all met on that shoot, and it was a Sundance. It was a Sundance Institute production. It was an adaptation of a Thomas Mosher book, Where the Rivers Flow North, and that was, yeah.
And it was funded by the NEA. Remember the NEA? So we met on that film, and then I went to work for HBO, and Annie can tell you where she was before she came to HBO, but there was an opening at HBO, and I was able to recommend her, and she came in as an AP on a film that ended up winning an Academy Award, so not a bad start.
So then, for many of you who have day jobs and are working to make film, this is basically what happened. So we're going to sound really, really old, but we were shooting on 16 millimeter for the film that we were doing at HBO. And
What was the film?
One Survivor Remembers.
Oh, right.
So Carrie Antholis was the producer for HBO for the film, and we were incredibly judicious. Buddy Squires was our DP, and he was wonderful. And at any rate, we held on to, this was back when you would buy film from Kodak, and then you could basically carefully tape your cans back and resell them back to Kodak and get some money back. But Carrie basically said, this has already been paid for by HBO, so don't worry about selling back the film. You guys can have the film. So we basically took the 16 millimeter and we went down to North Carolina on the first project that we really started together. And I still joke about that project because I had a car, our friend William had a camera, I had access to free film, you had the story lead, and
our professor from Dartmouth did sound on it. He came down to North Carolina, where we stayed at the Motel 6 for as long as we could afford it, and shot. But that's a film we shot over 13 years. That's the film, The Trials of Daryl Hunt.
Right, so literally starting with nothing, right? Just like a hope and a prayer and a free car and some free film.
And so much of that was basically about having good working relationships with people. We were lucky enough to land in production companies where there were some resources and there were good mentors, and there was a willingness to say, oh, if you want to actually use our system after hours, you can screen your footage here, you can use this to watch your dailies, here's an office space you might be able to use for a little bit. All of those things make a huge difference because we didn't have an office.
And I was just going to say, and we also did In My Corner. We were both at HBO. We shot at night and on the weekends a film about a junior Olympic boxers in the Bronx that we filmed over 3 years. That ended up on PBS, but it was, you know, people say, oh, you did it for 3 years. I was like, yeah, but we were working during the day. You know, this is like because, you know, if you're compelled to tell a story, you just have to do it.
So at what point did you feel like you were real filmmakers and you could actually quit your full-time jobs? Or I guess I should rephrase that, you decided to take the leap into quitting your full-time jobs and becoming full-time filmmakers?
Well, I remember this so clearly because The Trials of Daryl Hunt, for those of you who've never seen this fine film, is actually one of the films I think we're most proud of. It's about a remarkable man, Daryl Hunt, who was wrongfully convicted in North Carolina. And he served 19 years for a crime he didn't commit. He was exonerated. But it took us from the day we started to the day it premiered at Sundance. It was a 14-year odyssey. And we had to put it down at one point because his case basically wasn't advancing. The defense attorneys had tried every which way to they basically felt completely stalled, and it was only going to be kind of a miracle that was going to ultimately change his sentence. So we had to move on because we basically had a film that went like this, but we didn't have an ending. And so at that point,
Can I just add
Yeah.
one thing to that? And also, I think because we were young, and had we been with 60 Minutes, for example, we could really be questioning the criminal justice system. But he had already been turned down by the state Supreme Court. He had lost 4-3. And we felt kind of young and powerless in some ways. And I think now, with so many films coming out, like Making a Murder and all these other things that we've now seen, and we have these platforms, I think maybe it might have been different. We might not have put it down, but yeah.
But the reality was basically we'd taken this film as far as we could go. We'd made one film together, the boxing documentary. We'd started this other one, and we'd raised a lot of grants for the Trials of Daryl Hunt, but it wasn't sustaining us. We still had our day jobs. And at that point, we basically said, okay, well, we'll just put a pin in it. And then I started working elsewhere. I made a fiction feature film in the interim. You wrote a book series. You started a family. So we stayed friends. And I will never forget the winter. I was on a holiday. It was like the winter, end of the year holiday. I was with my family, and I got a phone call from you, and you were like, Mark Rabel just called.
Yeah, I got a call. I literally had said to my accountant, because I was writing these book series, and I had two little children at the time, and was thinking about a third, and I just, film, I hadn't worked in film in a couple of years. I said, maybe I should just close Breakthrough Films, because we haven't really had any income going through it in a couple of years. And on December 25th, Mark Rabel called me and said, no, it wasn't Mark Rabel, sorry, it was someone else I knew who I knew the story from, said, do you remember me? Daryl Hunt looks like he's going to get out of prison. And so we went January 3rd or something to North Carolina and shot the next year to finish the story. But I remember calling my accountant on January 2nd, don't close the account. I think we might have one more film in us. And then from there, it just after went to Sundance, and even before then, I think we had The Devil Came on Horseback as we were finishing it.
As we were finishing, yeah, so to the point where you just leap in, at a certain point, I actually got fired. The first and only time I've ever been fired. We were working on The Trials of Daryl Hunt, and I had just gotten a job that I was really proud of, and it was actually the biggest weekly paycheck I'd ever earned, and I was show running a new project for A&E for another New York production company. And they walked into my office one day and they said, you're not in this show. Your head is not here. And every time we come in, you're kind of working on your own film over here. And basically we need someone who's gonna be here. And I said, you're right, I'm not here. So that was a very clear decision. And then we basically started working full time on this. And it was that sort of magic elixir of, you get your first film out into the world, people start hearing about you, paying attention to you, and all of a sudden someone will be like, oh, Julie, I have this other story. And that's how The Devil Came on Horseback came up.
And I think that's exactly right. I think that the journey towards becoming where you are, which is professional filmmakers with a rack full of accomplishments behind you, it's very messy, as you said yesterday on the phone. It's kind of a give and a take and a push and a pull and a being on the brink of giving up and then jumping forward. What did you do? How did you get the next film going? Because up till then you had been fundraising. Nobody had picked up the phone and said, I've got a film for you.
I had done fundraising when I had done a fiction film in the interim. I raised, it was closer to $2 million, which at the time was a decent budget for an indie film. So I had sources of investors, and we'd done a typical film finance structure and everything else. When we did Devil Came on Horseback, Trials of Daryl Hunt was totally grant-based, completely grant-based. And we ended up selling that film to HBO. So there was money that was there that both helped. Actually, a lot of it went to support Daryl, which was fantastic to be able to do that. But there's also a little bit of we were able to kind of give money to the people who helped us along the way. So with The Devil Came on Horseback, for the first time, we said, okay, we had a successful sale of a film. We could go out to investors. And we also did something unique. If people have social issue films, it's something that is still very doable. You can, in fact, create a structure that's not a typical financing structure that allows people to put nonprofit money side by side with for-profit money. And you just need to have investors. And now that there are groups like Impact Partners and people who are more interested in social impact investing, who are willing to abide that, because what's kind of interesting is that it allowed us to basically play in both pools. And so we had a great outreach partner for Devil Came on Horseback, and also an investor that never needed to get paid back. So that allowed that film to get financed really quickly.
I was just going to say, I mean, we also keep our expenses really, really low. I mean, for many, many years, and Daryl Hunt included, we worked out of our houses, our apartments, and our editor's apartment in Brooklyn. We were talking about, I just can't even say it. Devil Came on Horseback, we cut in a closet.
Yes, we rented a closet from somebody else's company.
We rented a closet at Primalex. You know, and I remember it was $700 a month, and I was like, oh my God, you know, it wasn't that long ago. So $700 wasn't even really that much money, but we really have kept our, and we take a lot of, not so much, knock on wood, recently, but we do a lot of nonprofit work, like for the Foundation for Suicide Prevention, for example. We've done a lot of so those are like work for hires, smaller things that just kind of keep your staff. It's always nice. And Jamaica, who's here, worked for us for many years. And a lot of it is like you're doing jack of all trades. You're doing everything because we can't afford to hire just a receptionist or someone who, you know, is going to be loading footage. Like everyone really participates and does everything.
And do you think that that's really a good skill set that you have developed? So now looking back, when you're hiring people, they're doing stuff that you had to do on your own. And then you have a better skill set for managing people who are working on your films. Does that help that you've done all of that work yourself?
It absolutely helps. I mean, I do remember that feeling of liberation the first time we hired an assistant. I was like, oh my God, I don't have to go to FedEx at midnight before Sundance again, because like there's a time when you are doing everything. And I do think that the things that are really valuable for people who are looking to have colleagues or just a cohort of people, even if you don't have an office that you share, is having people who have a different skill set. Like we have this, you know, we have Seth Keel in our office who does a lot of in-house graphics, so that when you're coming up with an idea, you have someone who can help you cut it, you know, and then you have a pitch reel to present to investors or to networks. And but a lot of that comes from, I mean, I will say, so many of the relationships that we've had have been through this film community. I mean, the first lead to a job at HBO is because of a college mentor who, you know, it's just, again, you can't be afraid to introduce yourself to people in this industry. And then it's funny how people then bring other people your way.
Do you want to show, as this is a visual medium, shall we show a clip? Shall we show Devil Came on Horseback, which is the film cut in the closet? Yes. Okay. I don't know who I'm supposed to speak to. Can we?
I just want to say the one thing that was unique about this film and the films that we've done is that we did the most international pre-sales on this film. In addition to, like, again, as you're thinking about projects that might have reach, IDFA is happening like this week and next week. It's
Just tell them what IDFA is.
International Documentary Film Festival, Amsterdam, and it's one of the, along with Hot Docs in Toronto and AFI Silver Docs to a degree in New York. It's a great place where a lot of the commissioning editors from around the world get together, and they have pitch forums where you literally have 7 minutes. You present your reel, you do your spiel, and then people ask you questions, and then you either do or don't walk away with a commission. But we did get 7 pre-sales for this film, and that also helped us do the production financing. The other thing is this was one of the films we did our own self-release for theatrical, and because we had a nonprofit outreach partner, we were able to raise nonprofit money that allowed us to basically four-wall the film and had a really good theatrical run. Like, given what we put into it financially, it actually held over. We had a good, yeah.
Can I also just say about story? First of all, we did take it to HBO and they gave us some development money to get started on it, and then Sheila didn't want to do it. So we ended up doing it this way that Annie's talking about, and then sold it at Sundance at the film festival to National Geographic for its television. But I just want 2 seconds creative. I know this is a business thing, but you know, this is one of those things, and it still happens every day. It's like, I literally remember I was at a soccer thing for one of my kids, and got a call from my uncle about Brian's sister who was working in Africa, and was there a film? She went to a film, and I just was like, oh, I don't think there's a film. But then she started to talk to us about her brother, who was bringing these photographs. And Annie and I were in D.C., and we had a coffee, and we said, look, if these photographs come back, or we ended up meeting her brother there, but like, then let's talk. And I think that's the thing about, yes, there's the commercial business of being filmmakers and, eventually getting hired to do stuff. But a lot of it is your early passion and like following your gut and knowing what a good story is. And sometimes you just have to go for that story in any way that you can. And I think just like don't lose sight of that.
Absolutely, and that is actually a major part of running a documentary film production business is you really have to believe. And I think that the genesis of a film is always very interesting. How did you get involved with Joan Rivers, in fact, which I think is your most commercial film, at that time was your most commercial film to date?
We were finishing The Devil Came on Horseback, and I was talking to my mother, and I was like, what are we going to do next? And she said, you really should talk to, she was friends with Joan Rivers. They had become recent friends in their 70s. And she said, you really should like hang out with her. She's just this amazing woman who's like not like her persona. And you just have to walk down the street with her. And she goes to the corner and buys coffee and pie for the police officer who stand on Fifth Avenue outside. I mean, and truly I did go. And I sat with her for a day because for me it was very important that she had this vulnerability to her, that it wasn't, and anyway, and sat with her for an hour, and in that hour is like she has an openness and a vulnerability that I don't think people know about. And so it really just, again, and because she was in Manhattan and on 60th whatever street, and our office was, she was in the NR train away, and Seth, who works in our office, did sound. We had a young camera person who did camera, and they didn't get paid their full salary until the film was sold out of Sundance. And they were in it too. They were just like, let's do it. So sometimes you can make a deal.
Well, how did you actually fund the production? You all worked for nothing?
Pretty much, we were working on other projects. We had some money that we had that we were considering a profit that we kept in the company, that we invested in it. And we desperately tried to pre-sell the film. And I remember going to We Television. It was down to We, no offense to We, but everyone else
a brutal meeting.
had turned us all down. And it was interesting. They had like sort of strung us along. And I remember it was a $200,000 offer, and then we got into Sundance. And then our smart lawyer said, you need a paper that says nothing's ever been signed, because what will happen is you'll go to Sundance and then We Television will say like, oh, we love that movie we made with you. And nothing had ever been signed. And so we had a piece of paper and we sent it to them and said, we're not locked into anything. You've never paid us. We've never done paperwork, blah, 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 blah. Afterwards, we got a congratulations. We Television's so excited that you guys made this, but we're going to be having this movie. And we said, so I think you have to just, it's hard to have faith and to think things are ever going to turn out. And that film was such a huge success. Who knew? Everyone was a naysayer about it. So sometimes you just have to trust yourself.
That is indeed amazing. And just that little point about having a lawyer, make sure you get everything in writing. Getting everything in writing is so critical to your success, particularly when you're sort of funding as you go and talking to a lot of people as you go and kind of exploring where are we going to get our next bit of funding, that it's very critical that you get things in writing, right?
And to that point, even as you're just starting a project, and I've had friends who've then, we talked to a lot of friends or mentor, younger filmmakers, people will call up and they'll be a little bit screwed because they started down a path with someone and there was never a clear understanding of who owned the film or what the roles were or what the credits were. And we, after the Trials of Daryl Hunt, we had our own shorthand and we'd worked together. And the crew that worked on Trials of Daryl Hunt, were really old, close friends, all very committed. But from The Devil Came on Horseback, we basically had co-production agreements. Like we started papering everything. Even if it's just a one-page email that you send to whoever it is that you're working with or developing something with that outlines what your understandings are at that point. Because it's too hard, both on the relationships and potentially on the film down the line, if people are just like, if there's contention.
And I also to that, like even releases of these main characters who say yes. I mean, I know it sounds so stupid, but my kids always say to me, did you sign the contract? And literally films will get done and we haven't signed the contract. There's so many negotiations back and forth between companies that oftentimes you just have to jump in and do it. And even this last film we did, took a year to sign the contract.
Is that reversing row?
Reversing.
But at least you have a paper trail.
Yeah.
So when you go about starting a project now, in terms of now that you're established filmmakers, you're coming up with ideas, you are now pitching and making deals, or are you still trying to self-finance, or a little of both?
It's a little bit of both. I think what you start to find is that lots of things will start to find you. There's a huge need for content in the world right now, and one of the things that was actually a really great sustaining project for us for a couple of years was an Amazon. It became an Amazon series, but it started out as a series for Vogue. And for Hulu, it was about the Fashion Fund, which is a Council for Fashion Designers of America. They have a competition every year for new emerging talent designers.
And they came to you.
And that came to us. And again, just because you never know where things are going to come from, like I had helped a friend of mine who was running the Human Rights Capital campaign about marriage equality. And so we basically said, we'll do these 30-second spots, for free, basically. And it was everything from Mike Bloomberg to Anna Wintour saying, I believe in marriage equality. And those kind of went viral. So we'd literally gone to Anna's office to film her thing. And the very next day, I'm sure she was like, let's get them. They're cheap. They have a crew of 2. She called us the next day, or her office did, and said, Anna would like to have a meeting with you. And so that's how the Fashion Fund kind of came together. It's like all of a sudden there was this idea that there was a series in this competition. And so, but that was actually for 4 years, really nice, steady revenue for the company.
That's fantastic. And do you want to talk a little bit about how you started Reversing Row, which is your current film that's on Netflix right now? And can you just talk a little bit now, as established filmmakers, how you went about getting that film off the ground and funding it? And also, is your company a not-for-profit? Are you half-profit, half-not-for-profit? How are you set up legally now?
Yeah, our company is a for-profit, but we do a lot of work that is nonprofit. And if it's money that's coming in that's nonprofit towards a project, then we will get a fiscal sponsor. So Women Make Movies, or I forget some of the other ones we've used over time. But just quickly, again, the Reversing Row, we were finishing a film for HBO, the Marathon documentary, and it got pushed to be released in November, and so we were had a lot of work, and we'd gotten this crazy call from ABC's group called Lincoln Square Productions saying, they'd sent us this sort of history of women's reproductive rights and whatever. We were going to say no, which is a lot of times you just go like, I'm not interested, or it's not going to be what we want to do. But we were like, let's just have an hour coffee, and we did. We met them for an hour, and we just didn't know that a history of women's reproductive rights would really be our thing. And then we woke up the next day. Oh, this was election day. We woke up the next day, 2016, and we all had the same response, which is like, actually, this is going to be very, very important and urgent, and we're not going to make a multiple-part series about the history. We're going to look at how we've come to this place today where abortion has become so politicized, and we will look at the history as a way of understanding contemporary politics around abortion. So it morphed very quickly, and because we were working with Lincoln Square Productions, and Eva Longoria's company, they took it right away to Netflix, and in January, Netflix came on very quickly. So that was
like a 24-hour decision. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's really unheard of. But that's why I say the paperwork, we were able to get started because of ABC and some funding that they, I think, advanced, and were able to advance. And then, the project took forever to sort of figure out whose roles and what roles, but we were shooting in January.
But that's an example where we were not the production company. And again, just when I think about sustainable models since this is about production companies, the goal of having a production company is that you can pull in extra cash wherever you can from a budget. So if you're a production company, that generally entitles you to 10% of what's called, it's like your production company fee, and that's supposed to cover your overhead, your legal, just the cost of doing business. In a situation like this, we were attached as directors. Our company wasn't engaged. Lincoln Square Productions was, in fact, a contracting company that sold to Netflix. And so it's an interesting model. You just don't want to do it all the time if you have a production company, because it means that you're kind of losing out. What you end up trying to do in those situations is carve out certain budget line items that you, if you have those resources, can control. Say you're a filmmaker and you have 2 cameras and you've got an edit system, well, you could potentially pitch that as like, I've got post services and I'm gonna rent my cameras to production, and that's another way to bill back. But those are the things that you're constantly trying to do if you're managing a company. Otherwise, it's a lot easier. The best job to have in the film industry, I still think, is an editor, because you're always working and you're not responsible for owning a damn thing. And then, I think producers and directors, you kind of have to hustle for it. And so anyway, those are just the ways that you bring it back into your company.
But the idea about hustling is almost kind of, it gives you the opportunity to do what you want, because you wouldn't go pitch something you don't want to do. Why don't we just look at the trailer for Reversing Row? Is that okay?
Can they just bring the volume up a teeny bit?
And bring the volume up. Nice job, you guys. Can't wait to see it. I have one more question I want to ask you before we throw it to the audience for questions, and that is, you're both producers, you're both directors, you have a lot of similar skills. How do you divide and conquer what you each do on a particular film?
Jeez, and we always get asked that. We don't have a good answer. We just sort of do it. I don't know.
I mean, sometimes, it's as simple as, it does allow you to do more projects at the same time or develop projects while you're doing something. I think we definitely have a sense of what the story is as we go in. We talk about what the through line is. We talk about what the tone is. We make the key hiring decisions together. We're on all the initial shoots together. And then, depending on travel and what needs to be covered, sometimes one person will cover a shoot and the other person will cover a different shoot. In the edit room, we're very much in the cuts together. But I do think that, there are creative, we had a joke, I had this conversation in San Francisco for an event for this film, and there was another filmmaking team that was there, and we both compared it to, like, it's parents who argue in front of their children. I'm not saying that an editor is a child, but there are times when there can be creative conversations, but at the end of the day, it's like those battles ultimately sort of work out and I think are better for the film. But
I think that's a very important ingredient that you guys have, that you work together so well, and you ultimately produce such powerful films. So we'd like to know what you guys want to ask of Ricki and Annie, because they're such successful filmmakers. Who has a question out here? Go ahead, I'll repeat your question. Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Yes, so talk about the actual numbers way you define your company and how you make sure that you bring in a profit.
Yeah. Very typically, there are differences, and I'm just going to speak to the nonfiction realm here. There are single-off film
Do
budgets.
you mean the profit side?
Nonfiction versus
profit.
a production company for a fiction film, which is totally separate. But with nonfiction, when you're doing documentary, there are both series approaches and fiction film or feature film approaches. Generally, if you're doing a multi-part and you're selling it somewhere, they won't allow you to take both a producer fee and a production company fee unless you can really prove that you're doing that line item. What the best way is, if you are looking to gain money back, is to put yourself in as the director, put in a production company fee, and then whatever services you can provide and justifiably provide from your end. Is it graphics? Is it camera rental? Is it post-production services, meaning you have an edit room, you have anything that you can, your office rent. Some of those things get covered under production fees, but if there are things that you would have to go out of pocket for, you're trying to build them back as much as possible. The other thing is, in terms of structures and entities, it's very easy to go create an S corp. It's like $100 in Albany. You can do it by mail. There's a guy who's a lawyer who basically runs it into the state house and gets everything signed, and that basically allows you to operate and gives you some legal protection, so that if you're taking money or making a film, that you have basically a corporate entity that protects you from ever being personally liable for that, if there's ever a claim of defamation or libel or anything.
And you might do that, even though you have a production company, you might, for a single project, open up a separate bank account and have a separate S corp for that, so that, let's say something disastrous goes on with it, your whole company isn't liable for that.
They're known
I
as
hear the
special
movie
purpose
next
vehicles.
door. Our movies play.
And special purpose vehicles can be corporations. They can also be LLCs. It all depends on. LLCs are a little bit more expensive to manage, just from a tax perspective, what your annual payments are. But
And I just want to say, like, if you can in your budget and allows, depending on how it gets audited, if it's going to get audited, but if you have a line item for camera rental, you can sometimes buy your camera, right? You'll rent it back for the project, and then you own it, and so you can rent it for another project. Mm-hmm. So buying your own equipment, sometimes it doesn't make sense because you work with a DP who likes to rent their equipment, but sometimes it does make sense.
So essentially, if you put a 10% line at the bottom of the budget that says production fee, no one's going to blink an eye.
No, Yeah, that's
Okay.
You can do that.
Any other questions?
Hey there.
Hi.
So it sounds like your production company sort of came out of the process of making films sort of organically, but now you have a company and obviously you've taken it and run with it. Do you think about the branding of your company? Does the company brand have any like more or less weight than your own personal sort of brands as filmmakers? And do you think that that's helpful or potentially constrictive? And if so, like how would you describe your sort of company brand?
Well, I would just start and say that I think, we've always taken projects that we're very interested in, and we have turned down projects that feel maybe fluffier. I mean, we've done, Fashion Fund is about fashion, but, I think we felt there was heart to it. And I think for us, it's about character and story. And so I think when people look at, we've done films that are, about baseball players, about abortion rights, and all these kinds of things. What is true to the DNA of what we do is this core character and storytelling that is important to us, that has some resonant meaning that will linger on, I think, is how we look at it.
But I have to say, I think, and I'm also speaking a little bit for myself here too, but I think that we think first of ourselves as filmmakers and secondarily about the brand of Breakthrough Films. I think that some companies are much more specific about what the brand is that they're creating. I think I can tell you, several television companies that come to mind off the top of my head that are known for a specific kind of content. And for example, we're working with one group that has been known for a specific kind of content, and that's been their brand. It's been a little bit more difficult for them to pivot into different kinds of content production. So oddly, I think we tend to lead with character-driven films, and our work as filmmakers, and then the company in some ways serves the filmic vision, if that makes sense. But branding a company, it's again, what kind of projects you want to work on? What do you think is going to get you closer to that?
And I just add one thing is, so for example, now we're doing this 4 1-hours about a murder in New York City. And so that's like real crime. And, because we haven't done exactly that before, real crime series, we're going to be tested on it essentially. And, we feel very confident that we can do it, but until you've done exactly something similar to what is being produced, it's very hard. People either have to have a leap of faith or know that you will deliver something good regardless of what the subject is. But in that genre now, like true crime, there are companies that are really specialized in doing true crime. And so, you'll have to prove yourself no matter what your record is.
And Ricki, is that something that someone pitched to you, or this is an idea that you guys pitched?
It's similar to what Annie was saying with the other project is we were hired on as directors, and in order for us to make it work for our company, we said we need certain line items because we have 2 people on staff that we can't let go. And so we were able to say, okay, well, she does this pre-production work, and so she'll take this line item, and he does this kind of early pre-production work, and he can take that. And so basically we are able to keep our staff on for the whole life of the project, but they take up certain line items.
And what are your staff, the 2 staff people you have? What do they do? Is one an editor, graphic designer?
No, I mean, so one person, she is more the research and archival clearances, production coordinating, and the other person is much more production and post. So post supervising, he can do graphics, media management, cameras, and all that kind of stuff. It divides sort of in those 2 lines.
And then we have an accountant who's in once a week, and some of those things.
This question's on those lines. I'm Mary Olive Smith, independent filmmaker. So do you pay yourselves a salary, or do you pay yourselves on a project-by-project basis? And also, if I could push a little harder on the roles, do you take turns taking the lead? I noticed Joan Rivers, one was a director, one's a co-director, and how do you make those decisions to avoid conflict?
Just really quickly, I'll say about the situation with, we don't necessarily pay salaries. We don't have enough sustained. We can't anticipate. We also don't have financing. It's not like we have a lien on financing somewhere over here where we're responsible to another entity. So all of our income comes from the projects that we generate. And sometimes you have a sense of what you're going to be bringing in that year. So we just pay out of the project. So we take director's fees out of projects. We generally hire staff. Our word is we will try to keep you fully employed, but we will be paying you weeks here out of this project, weeks here out of this project, weeks here out of this project. And we will alert people if it looks like we're not going to be able to keep people on through the next year.
But we do pay ourselves a bonus. So as we're profiting, at the end of the year, it's in order not to, so that you're not sitting with tons of money if you've made a profit. What we've done sometimes is we've paid our rent a year in advance. So it's not sitting on your books at the end of the year. We've paid our phone, we've paid out any monthly expenses that we know we're going to have, like, garbage removal and stuff, a year in advance, so that at the end of the year, you're not paying taxes on money that you know you're going to need in order to sustain your company. And just creatively, that was sort of an exceptional project just because I had that relationship. But typically we don't do that. Typically we just work together unless, and it's nice to clarify beforehand. But I think it really is just over the years, just back and forth. We sit next to each other, So it's like, it just sort of, I know it's hard to explain, which is why we don't have a good answer. It just seems to work. And I think that we're both very understanding of each other's other lives. Family and everything comes first to us, and we try to help more when the other person has some stressors in their life and that kind of thing.
Next
Hello,
question.
I'm Marcelo Buquin. Good to see you. Which advice would you give to, let's say, your younger self when you are starting out, but dealing with your creative freedom when dealing with either investors or networks? Because then it comes expectations, and I had my own experiences, which sometimes it can become tricky, right?
Yeah.
Like basically, if I can go deeper into the question is, would you, I don't know if the word is regret, but would you do something different when signing a deal with any network or with some investors? Would you like say, okay, I really want to work with you, but these are the rules of the game that then now because of experience?
I mean, I'll start more on the creative side of it. I think that it took me a really long time to be able to hear feedback, and to not just be like, I don't agree. I don't, they're stupid. I was like not looking for advice, not looking for feedback. But what I've realized is I think it's because I didn't have the confidence to push back, so that I know now, for the most part, people just want to have an opinion and they give their opinion. And I think, you can correct me, Annie, if you think I'm wrong, but I feel like most of the time, they're not creatively pushing back in such a way that like if you say, I really disagree, this is why I'm passionate that it should go this way. Oftentimes they've hired you or you're working with them because they want your vision. And so I think, I think that's part of it. I don't think you can enter into contracts other than saying that you have final cut, which you should always have final cut. I don't think you can do anything else. I mean, if you're working and they're paying for it, sometimes you just have to say, they're paying for it. So it's not going to be exactly how I want it, but they're paying for it, and I just have to give it up, and I have to do my best to retain.
I mean, I think the unfortunate truth is whoever pays for it really kind of, in the end, might have the final say. I mean, if you are able to set it up so that you're producing, you're financing, you're facilitating your vision, obviously it is your full creative game to enjoy. In terms of, I do think that the blessing and the burden of having someone else say, oh, I will finance your movie, Marcelo, was like, it might mean that you need to work on it. You need to go deeper into this part of the story. You might need to shift this, or we're not going to release a 4-hour and 28-minute film. So it's. But the other thing I was going to say in terms of regrets, the one thing I wish I had learned to do better early on, oddly, is edit. Like just pure editing, just editing early on, because I do think that also helps you as a filmmaker. However, I mean, it's in some ways less of an issue now because you can overshoot everything in digital, but I do think as a storyteller, and also as you think about framing things, editing and understanding the editing process is incredibly valuable. And it's also, if you're dry, it's a great job to lean on. So.
I mean, the only thing I was going to say again about the creative is that if you can just like let them say their thing and just, listen to it and not respond. I mean, half the time I think that they just want to say their thing and know that you're listening to them, and then smile and come back with, we're going to think about that. And, and come back with a reason why it doesn't. Oh, we thought a lot about it and we were trying this, but just not going to, I really think a lot now that is really what people are looking for. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. You could speak specifically if there's something that you're struggling with.
And actually, I don't think you're being disingenuous about that. I think it really is the honest approach to take with an executive, having been an executive, to just entertain the idea, think about it. If you don't think it works, it's your responsibility to say, this is not going to work. So nobody knows better than you. At the same time, the network will always decide whether or not they're going to say yes or no, but hopefully they've hired you because they trust you, they respect you, they like your work, and hopefully you'll win your argument. But it is good to listen first before.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just keeping that open mind, because you do sometimes make your own discoveries with it. Sometimes they're responding to something that's not really what their comments are about. They're responding to something else but they come up with suggestions. And so if you can be open-minded and just go like, well, why are they saying that? Oh, maybe it's really about this. Maybe it's the scene before that's just dragging, or whatever. I do feel like it doesn't hurt to be open.
I totally relate to what you say about like listening and just digesting. In the past, I think it was more insecurity in my end. It's like I was very defensive. It's my film. I was like, okay, let's see. And actually, many people can bring great points of view. Just a question from what you said before about Final Cut. But do you maintain the Final Cut in these situations with co-productions with the networks or not?
And I mean, technically, the last two films we've had, we don't officially have Final Cut. The group that owns the film, Netflix financed the film, so they actually own the film. They had the official Final Cut. But it's a very fluid conversation, because their interest was to make the best film that we could, that they could help support. So we never had any like real pushes about what, I mean, everyone's goal in the end is to make the right film. Absolutely. So it's something that, again, if that's the thing that is what you need to do, then you need to figure out how to raise your own money.
Totally. Thank you.
Can you address the issue of for-profit versus not-for-profit in making a documentary? And also you mentioned at the beginning about doing one that was partly for-profit and partly not-for-profit fundraised.
Really quickly, if you go to Albany and you set up a protective company shell because you want to start taking income, or you want to just protect yourself if you're making a film, you are technically a for-profit company. If you are a nonprofit company, there are all sorts of rules establishing a 501c3, and it's very complicated. I don't know anyone who has the energy or the time or the desire to create a 501c3. There are lots of people who have 501c3s, however, and often, what I was saying with The Devil Came on Horseback, we have used fiscal sponsors. Another creative way to do it, which we've done on other projects, is you find your nonprofit partner, someone who's working in that social outreach space that you are focused on. They might be very happy to step in and become your fiscal agent for an additional 2%, 5%, 10% fee, whatever you think they deserve for the accounting work that they're going to do to manage that grant. So, for example, you're the filmmaker, and the best way to do this is not create one corporate shell, but to create what we did, which was co-production agreements. So, Nina, you and I are going to make a film. I'm nonprofit, you're for-profit. We're going to share in the film 50-50. So we have a co-production agreement between us that outlines what we own in the film. And then as money comes in, each piece of money is given a production agreement with a set of returns that are specific to that investment. You can still have ongoing profit participation. But say I find a grant for $100,000, that comes in, they don't need to be repaid. They just need certain benchmarks quantifying the outreach that we're going to do for that grant. So that's great. Over here, on the profit side, you say, I want $100,000 coming in, and my investor says that they want to get paid back plus 20%, and they want to be in first position. Well, we can talk to every investor, and we can basically make an agreement that's solely to each investor, and that's one way of doing it. It's a little bit burdensome, and everyone gets their own different kind of what are called distribution reports as opposed to K1s. But you basically then have to hire another company to do that, and they will issue. You won't be issuing the K1s, but the distribution, it's called a collection agency. Not the people who are saying you owe me money, but they're basically collecting money on behalf of the film and distributing it to the people who put money into the film. So if you want to talk about it more, I'm happy to, but it's one way of doing it. And in some ways, your nonprofit partners probably, it's not that burdensome because maybe you're going to get 12 grants over the life of your film. You just have to be willing to do the reporting. Yeah.
At the end of the year. And they go on and on and on.
Hi there. I was wondering how feasible you feel it is to start a production company not in New York or LA, and how important are those you know,
I think it's
industry?
really possible. I think, Chicago, Atlanta. Anyway, I'm just like I can't. There's so many places. Nashville. There's
Miami.
Miami. Yeah, there's so
Austin.
much production, and New Hampshire. Ken Burns' company for a long time was out of his house in New Hampshire. I think it's really possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, I'm back. Just a couple nuts and bolts questions. These should be quick. Do you guys use a budgeting software? If so, which budgeting software do you use, or how do you make budgets? And secondly, when you're doing development on new projects, do you get potential characters or people involved in the film to sign attachment agreements or anything like that so that you can successfully pitch? What are your key documents in development? Thank you.
Really quickly about budgeting. I used to work solely in Movie Magic, then we moved to Excel just because Movie Magic was expensive to license for multiple computers and everyone had to have those darn dongles that we would always lose. I don't know if you remember those things that you used to have to plug into your computer. So then we would just do a draft budget in Excel. Now we have a payroll service because we are officially a company, and so we have people who get weekly paychecks, and we put, each payroll company, Vista Entertainment Partners, has budgeting software that they license for people who are their clients. So we are primarily using Movie Magic, and that's industry standard.
But when you sort of do a budget for a film, your preliminary stage, you're first going out, you're either raising money or pitching or whatever, and someone says, "What's the budget?" It's just the budget that you've created.
Yeah,
Excel.
for example, we just pitched something that's a 6 1-hours, and so we went off another 6 1-hour budget that we had, but our potential, they came back with lots of really good questions, and so finally I was like, I'm just going to hire a line producer who really does this because this is too big a project, and that person took what we had already worked on and was able to, within a couple days, just revise it so that it was industry standard, and in the end is going to save a lot of time and headache for not a lot of money. So sometimes if you really have a series and you're just like, and you haven't really done something for like a Netflix or something like that, it's helpful just to just go to a line producer and engage them. And what was the second question? Oh, yes, yeah.
It was like just the contracts. You definitely, we've done first option or first look options or first option. You're raising money, so you can't necessarily pay someone at that time to develop. What they would probably do is sign a good faith deal with you, which is if the project moves forward. It gets more complicated if you're doing life rights, if you're doing, you basically want to have some understanding and agreement that this person isn't then going to go talk to, Julie has a fantastic production company, and I think she'll get my story out there faster. You want to have a period of time where you've signed something, they're committed to you, and
You want them attached. You don't want to be paying them money for their interview, but you can be paying them something if they want money for their photographs or things like that. But it's not kosher to pay an interview person subject money to tell their story, but you can pay their book license if they've written a book about their life or some kind of life rights.
or a research fee for helping to source down other interviewees. who are tied to the
Consultant
story.
fee of some sort about their life, but you're not paying them for the interview.
So we just have a couple more minutes. I just wanted to ask you if you could just talk a little bit about what you're juggling right now in terms of your the heart projects versus the commercial projects, and how you divide up your time, and what's your passion project now?
Today was a pretty good example. This morning was a bunch of quick phone calls about an idea that's sort of a passion project of ours, followed up with a bunch of emails about a project, because we're wanting a lot of people to know about Reversing Roe, because it's out right now on Netflix. So we spent a fair amount of time. And then we had another hour and a half about production planning for a shoot that we're doing tomorrow for the 4-part series. But in terms of larger projects,
Yeah, I think we're looking for so we have a series that hopefully will go, and that's really just to keep people working in our office and to keep everyone and to pay our rent and all that kind of stuff. That's it'll obviously we're really interested in it, which is why we're going to do it. But I think we're always looking for the next feature doc, because that's really what we're passionate about, doing feature docs.
And what's the best piece of advice you could end this panel with for people that are hoping to start a company that will be successful? I know that's a hard one.
Well, I think Annie's really good at this, which is seeking advice. I'm a little bit shyer about it, and I don't really know how to do it. And but I do think that people are very generous in this business, and I think emailing them and, you know, understanding they may not, but even if you're like, is there someone in your office who could help me with, you know, or what might I go, or any, you know, I think just asking lots of questions about things you don't know and getting recommendations for like people who might help you with a budget. And, you know, an experienced line producer might look at it for free if you're like, this is an amazing topic, but I don't have, you know, so.
I don't know. Yeah, I was just going to say the only other. Do we have? Okay. I was just going to say that don't also get really comfortable with asking people for money. Just basically learning how to say this is worth your money, and this is what I need to make it. I mean, we did things as everyone does when you're first starting for no money because we didn't have any money and we were writing grants all the time. But then at a certain point, if you have any track record, if you've got anyone who can vouch for your work, if you have anything out there, you're in a place where you can honestly ask for money. And you should feel comfortable doing that. But yeah, that's always a hard one to ask. And the other thing, too, is like we also had a weird joke that it was kind of our year of yes. Like there are times when things are dry and you do sort of still have the dream of the passion projects over here. But other stuff comes to you, so sure, yes. Like, you know, there's a random digital series that was sponsored by Epicurious. Yes, we'll do that. Or yes, we'll do this thing. Or yes, we'll do some free projects for Human Rights Campaign, because you don't know what that's going to lead to. So
I think that's great final advice. Thank you guys so much. Congratulations on the success in your company.